Where do I begin with this movie? I've honestly had a tough time writing down my thoughts and feelings for this film since it made me so sick and disgusted that I just decided to try not to think about it. However, in the days that have transpired after its release, I just can't stop thinking about it. I haven't been this disappointed and angry over a comic book movie since probably Suicide Squad came out 3 years ago. I hadn't seen a comic book movie in God knows how long and almost killed my love for a character that I hold so dearly in my heart. But this film almost did that. This film, plain and simply, killed me inside, and I just feel like I have to let my disappointment and hatred for this film out because I don't think I can keep it to myself any longer and why it sucks so badly. Now, before anyone smashes their keyboard and calls me a fraud and a Sam Raimi shill who hates any incarnation of Spider-Man that isn't like that trilogy, hear me out. This is absolutely my opinion. I'm not trying to sway anybody that hate this film or call them an idiot for liking the MCU Spider-Man. If you love this film and think it's the definitive Spider-Man film and Tom Holland's the best actor to play this character, that's perfectly fine. I'm glad that people are enjoying this film and think it's a fun superhero flick that's one of the best films in the MCU. I'm just not a fan of this film, and of what they're doing with Spider-Man and the MCU in general. I feel like I have to vent my frustrations with the movie and character now. By the way, this video will contain major spoilers for the film, so if you haven't seen it yet, go see it and come back to watch this video. That is, if anyone decides to watch this video. Remember a few months ago when Avengers Endgame came out and all the heartbreaking moments like Tony Stark's and Black Widow's deaths had a ton of emotional impact and weight and worked so well? Well, right as the words In Memoriam come up in the Comic Sans font with Whitney Houston's cover of I Will Always Love You playing, I had a bad feeling that this film would make a mockery of Endgame and everything that transpired in that film. And would you know, I was right. All the emotional impact and weight from Endgame was made into a cringy montage of headshots of the deceased Avengers, with one of the best cover songs of all time playing over it. This is literally the first 2 minutes of the movie. If this film takes place after Endgame and is supposed to show Peter grieving after the loss of his mentor and his father figure, don't make a mockery of the previous film's events. It ruins all the investment that we're supposed to have with Peter during his grief. But then again, I'm honestly not surprised this happened, considering this film has the same writers of Ant-Man the Wasp, which was a lighthearted and fun but disposable superhero movie, and Far From Home feels the same. Far From Home's problem is it's so focused on being a lighthearted and fun Spider-Man adventure of him in Europe that it never explores the interesting ideas of the world after the events of Endgame and the consequences of Peter being Spider-Man, but like in Homecoming, there are really no consequences for Peter being a superhero. Remember when half the universe got snapped out of existence by Thanos in the 5 years of the world after those events? John Watts and the writers could have really gotten into the nitty-gritty of exploring this world after Endgame, but they don't. It would have been interesting to see how Peter fits in the world after being gone for 5 years. If anyone close to him survived the snap, or blip as it's called in this film, how would those close to him deal with the grief of losing their loved ones and Peter in the snap? Could you imagine how amazing the idea of Aunt May dealing with her nephew not being around for 5 years and the grief she has over it be? That would be great, right? Sadly, no. Every character from Homecoming conveniently got dusted and are the same characters they were in that film. Remember the ending of Homecoming where Aunt May finds out Peter is Spider-Man and how that dramatic moment from the comics was the last throwaway joke of that movie? This film could have explored the idea of how she worries about her nephew fighting crime every night and putting his life on the line and possibly losing him like how she lost her husband, but instead shows her being 100% supportive of him. Nice. Also, I'm sorry to say this, but this film mixing the stories of Peter grieving over the loss of Tony and wanting to fall in love with this girl who we barely care about was a terrible idea. All the dramatic potential for Peter grieving over this major loss that affects his life is thrown out the window for a cliched romance that tries to be like a John Hughes movie but fails in every aspect, features a cast of underwritten and underdeveloped supporting characters who serve only to give unfunny jokes and are just caricatures, and has a villain whose motives for being evil are because of Tony Stark. Oh, wow. This sounds just like Spider-Man Homecoming, but just set in Europe. This film also feels quite messy with its storytelling. It never reaches its full potential of all the unique ideas to explore, or doesn't really give them much thought at all. Parts of it feel like a high school vacation movie with a John Hughes vibe. Parts of it feel like a classic Spider-Man story of Peter Parker not wanting to be Spider-Man and be himself, but feels a responsibility to be a superhero, and a story of Peter grieving over the loss of his mentor and being gone from the world for 5 years. But it never focuses on one idea, and it results in this film being poorly written. I hate to say this, but this incarnation of Peter Parker is one of the poorest written versions of the character to date. First of all, he gives Tony Stark's final gift to him, which are the Edith glasses, the Quentin Beck / Mysterio, after having maybe 2 scenes of interacting with him and only known him for a few days. He trusts this guy, who he barely knows with these glasses, that not only shouldn't be his, but can also control the world. I'm sorry, but other versions of this character would not be this inept and stupid. Second, the whole idea of him having a crush on Michelle despite hardly interacting with her in Homecoming is just ludicrous. I guess getting dusted, coming back from the dead and watching Tony die in front of him really made him attracted to this girl who he barely knows anything about, and devised a plan to win her over on a trip to Europe. If Michelle Jones is supposed to be Mary Jane in this universe, you know, the love of Peter Parker's life and the woman that he goes on to marry in the comics, then this film absolutely gave hardly no care to develop the relationship and give it some depth. Sure, Both characters have some cute and awkward moments together, and Holland and Zendaya has some decent chemistry, but it's so shallow and was honestly a huge missed opportunity. In Homecoming, Michelle showed signs of being interested in Peter, while also being somewhat of a playful jerk to him. Do something with that. Make it where the two actually become really good friends over the course of a few films, develop their friendship into a romance, and make us want to see them hook up and become a couple. I don't want to compare this film to the Raimi films, since that'll make me sound like a Raimi stan, but at least those films took the time to develop the relationship between Peter Parker and Mary Jane. Both Peter and MJ have interesting and incredibly well-developed arcs in the first two movies, and we want to see them get together, and when they do in Spider-Man 2, it feels incredibly satisfying since Sam Raimi took the time to develop the relationship and make us care about both characters from the first movie. With Peter and Michelle, it's never given much thought in Homecoming, and then all of a sudden, Peter has a crush on her in this film, and once they hook up, it has no impact, and I didn't care because this film didn't care to develop their relationship. It also doesn't help that there's a love triangle in this film between Peter and Michelle and some random guy I don't remember the name of that has no depth, and is played for some stupid jokes that are not funny at all. Peter's arc is also really lackluster. Remember in Spider-Man Homecoming when he refuses Tony's offer of getting a new suit and becoming an Avenger so he can learn to be his own thing? Well, in this film, he's told to be the next Iron Man, but then also be himself and not live in the shadow of his mentor by Happy Hogan. But then in the next scene, Led Zeppelin, AC/DC, is blasting through the speakers of a plane while Peter is building a new suit like Tony would. If you want to have Peter's arc be that he needs to be his own thing, just go with it, and don't contradict it by having him be like Iron Man. It makes it harder for me to be invested in this character when they do something like that. Let's talk about Mysterio for a second. Even though I had no anticipation for this film, I was still excited to see what a marvelous actor like Jake Gyllenhaal would do with a villain as interesting and unique like Quentin Beck / Mysterio, but sadly this film let me down that aspect. My big problem I have with this character is his motives for being evil, which is revenge against Tony Stark. Strangely, it was also Vulture's motive in Homecoming for being a villain. Beck's whole motivation is to be the next big superhero after Iron Man, and to get back at Tony Stark after he was fired for being a little too crazy as an employee of Stark Industries. Basically, he's the villain pretending to be a superhero. Sound familiar? I honestly find it so lousy that Mysterio's motivation is because of Tony Stark, since there is no personal conflict in this film between Peter and Quentin, and they really don't develop the relationship between the two all that much. Sure, Holland and Gyllenhaal have decent chemistry, but it doesn't benefit the movie at all. Mysterio also has one of the worst scenes I have seen in a movie this year of him giving this giant exposition dump on why he turned evil, how he found all the people working for him that were fired from Stark Industries and their purpose in his grand scheme, and what he plans to do. That was so laughably corny, silly, and was way too over the top, even for a character as theatrical as Mysterio. Everyone knew going in that Mysterio was going to be the antagonist, but the twist of him acting as a hero but being the villain would have worked if they spent time fleshing out his relationship with Peter and developing him to be a villain we can empathize with, but that wasn't the case. At least with Vulture, they did a decent job of making you feel sympathetic towards him and see where he's coming from, but here I didn't care. Gyllenhaal is fine in the role and has fun with the character with what material he is given, but there were so many missed opportunities with this character. I will admit, however, that the scene where he uses all the illusions against Peter was visually terrific, and one of the best scenes in the film, but that's about the only really positive thing I can say about this iteration of the character. Spider-Man Far From Home also lacks its own visual flair and has incredibly lackluster direction. John Watts clearly has no passion for this character, and it just infuriates me. I was infuriated that this film rather focused on these characters that are there for cutaway jokes and aren't developed. I was infuriated on how this film wasted the cinematographer for the best shot superhero show of all time, Daredevil. It was nothing but shot reverse shot. I was infuriated at how poor the writing and storytelling were, and I was infuriated at how Tom Holland put his heart and soul into a role that he clearly loves playing. But this film makes it hard to root for him and relate to him. I'm sorry, but I can't relate to this version of Peter Parker and the characters he surrounds himself with. The characters aren't flawed and have the maturity of middle schoolers, and for films that try to have characters that act like teenagers a day, it feels unrealistic and fake to me. I'm 18, recently graduated high school and going off to college soon, and none of these characters feel real or relatable to me. They're caricatures of how actual teenagers act and feel today. Peter Parker's a character I can relate to in many different forms of media, but I can't here. He doesn't have problems that are relatable, there are no consequences for his actions and issues that he can learn from, has everything handed to him, and hasn't really learned the lesson of with great power comes great responsibility. I know this has been said before, but this isn't Spider-Man, and he feels more like a part of Iron Man's character than his own thing. I was hoping that this film would show him growing and maturing to be the Spider-Man I know and love, but he doesn't. This film doesn't really care to tell a Spider-Man story of emotional stakes, show consequences for his actions, or make him relatable, so why should I care about being invested in this film? Peter gets betrayed, gets hit by a train, his friends almost die at the hands of Mysterio, and then Mysterio quote-unquote dies, and how does he react? He's all smiles and joyful about the fact he kissed the girl that he likes instead of dealing with all this stuff he's been through that would hurt any other incarnation of Peter and scar him. It's like these films don't want Peter to learn and grow and be more responsible, and are more worried about being fun summer blockbusters that you can sit back and enjoy the fun adventure. With the mid-credits scene having J.K. Simmons reprise the role of J. Jonah Jameson, revealing Spider-Man's identity to the world, there would be so much awesome potential to tell a story of how Peter deals with the fact that people know who he is, him trying to convince people that he's not Spider-Man, and all the villains going after people he cares about, but they won't do that. Knowing how these films went, the third film will probably sweep it under the rug and treat it like it's a joke, instead of being this really intriguing and unique direction to take this character. Lastly, there's one more thing I want to talk about with this film, and it's also a problem I had with Homecoming, and that's the almost non-existent presence of Uncle Ben. I am so sick and tired of these films not acknowledging the character of Ben Parker because Marvel's too scared that people get annoyed at seeing him getting shot by a burglar again. Well, they don't even have to do it. Ben is such a vital character in the Spider-Man mythos. He's the man who teaches Peter about being responsible, taught him to be a good kid, and was basically his father. Uncle Ben dies because of Peter's lack of responsibility. Thus, he takes the lesson of with great power comes great responsibility to heart and becomes a mature and strong person. Thus, Spider-Man is born. Tony Stark is basically Uncle Ben in the MCU, and I have a problem with the fact that Tony means more to Peter than Uncle Ben ever did. Not once is he directly mentioned, and I honestly believe that Ben in this universe was never in Peter's life to begin with. I mean, Peter has a suitcase that belonged to Uncle Ben, and not once does he ever get sad or care about having a memento of his deceased uncle in his possession and losing it somewhere in the movie. Thanks, Marvel. I really appreciate you spitting in the face of the most vital part of the character of Peter Parker / Spider-Man. Spider-Man Far From Home was a miserable experience from start to finish. This film was painful to watch as a longtime fan of this character and left a bitter taste in my mouth that's almost as bad as black coffee. I really don't have much left to say since I feel like I've said enough to send all the MCU stands in a rage. As I stated earlier, if you love this film, that's great. I'm glad that people get so much joy and excitement from this version of Spider-Man, but it's just not my Spider-Man. This is not the relatable, angsty, nerdy teenager I grew up watching in the Raimi films, reading from the comics, and watching in the animated shows. It's just a happy and joyful teen that doesn't have many relatable qualities for me. I'll be honest in saying this might be my least favorite Spider-Man film to date, maybe only behind Spider-Man 3. As bad as Spider-Man 3 is, at least it has one thing that this film doesn't have, and that's someone who clearly tried to make a good movie and was passionate about the source material. It may have turned out to be a spit in the face to many aspects and characters from the comics and previous two films, but at least Sam Raimi tried the best he could, even with all the studio interference, in which I can't say the same for this film. I see no passion or love for the character in this film. Spider-Man Far From Home is easily the worst film in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I'm genuinely sad with the direction they've taken this character that I love so much.